While most Republican governors bowed down to Trump's demands, one state just said absolutely not to military deployment orders from the White House. And this act of defiance could signal the beginning of a constitutional crisis that every American needs to understand right now. What you're witnessing is unprecedented federal overreach disguised as public safety. Trump has militarized Washington, D.C., deploying National Guard troops on American streets, and now he's demanding other states contribute their forces. But Vermont's Republican Governor Phil Scott just drew a line in the sand that could reshape how we think about states' rights versus federal power. Let me show you exactly what's happening on the ground in our nation's capital right now.
What we are seeing in D.C. during the federal takeover. You can see multiple tanks behind me as well as National Guard members, and this is at Union Station. President Donald Trump has now requested more National Guard members, and the governors of South Carolina and West Virginia are now sending in hundreds of them. And that's on top of the more than 100 D.C. Guard members that have already been deployed here. Now, what we learned from the White House is that at this point, they are not armed, but that they could be. I've been tracking everything that has been happening during this takeover. Tuesday, I was there as the D.C. National Guard arrived and was deployed in D.C.
He got the call yesterday around 2 p.m. Then he received some orders stating that he has to be deployed for the next 13 days.
7 News continued to track the impact on the ground from the takeover. D.C. crime was already going down before the takeover. Crime stats show no significant change.
I think a lot of us are questioning, and I definitely myself am questioning, why now with this federal takeover?
Notice that last line. Crime was already declining. So why the military show of force? And here's where Vermont becomes the canary in the constitutional coal mine. While other Republican governors comply without question, Phil Scott is asking the hard questions about what this really means for American democracy. The resistance isn't just political theater, it's spreading.
We stand with D.C. We stand against fascism.
More than 40 protesters gathering in Montpelier expressing their outrage towards President Trump and his efforts to crack down on crime in Washington, D.C.
Total rage.
From the National Guard on the street to intervention with the D.C. Police Department, those holding signs saying the federal intervention is a violation that just can't be tolerated.
It's not controversial. It's downright illegal what they're doing. It's against the Constitution.
But Vermont's GOP chair, Paul Dame, is defending the administration, saying President Trump is doing what's best for D.C. residents.
Because when individuals feel unsafe in their homes going to work, the number one concern for a lot of people is safety. It's about safety. And however we get to that, that's what people are looking for.
Members of Vermont's congressional delegation, including Congresswoman Becca Balin, condemning the measures.
Let's cut right through it. What kind of leader uses the military against its own people?
Vermont Governor Phil Scott says he can see how there is a need to address problems in D.C., but federal intervention without transparency with the city is troubling.
If Burlington had an issue where they needed some help, we would come to their aid. But it's the request, it's the how, and that's where I disagree.
And then came the bombshell decision that shows Scott isn't just talking, he's acting. Governor Phil Scott has turned down a second request from President Donald Trump's administration in as many months to use members of the Vermont National Guard to carry out elements of the White House's controversial domestic policy agenda. The Department of Defense last week asked Scott for a few dozen troops it could deploy to Washington, D.C. as part of the president's sweeping push to crack down on crime in the city, Vermont Public reported Friday. But the governor said no, telling the Pentagon he didn't think the request was an appropriate use of the Guard's resources, according to the news outlet Dustin Debris. A spokesperson for Scott's office referred VT Digger to the Vermont Public story in response to a request for a comment on Friday afternoon. He declined to be interviewed or answer questions about the governor's decision. Trump has ordered hundreds of troops onto the streets of the nation's capital in recent days and moved to assert federal control over the city's police department. At a press conference Monday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said states could be called on to reinforce the city's National Guard if needed. On Friday, Washington, D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab sued the Trump administration over its efforts to take control of the local police force in late July. Scott rejected a separate request from the Trump administration to allow a dozen Vermont Guard troops to do clerical work for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the federal agency's field office in St. Albans. This is twice that Vermont has refused Trump's military requests. What you're seeing isn't just state versus federal power, it's the constitutional system of checks and balances being tested in real time. Scott's defiance proves that principled resistance to federal overreach still exists, even within Trump's own party. And as D.C.'s Attorney General files lawsuits and other states watch Vermont's lead, we might be witnessing the beginning of a broader constitutional awakening. The question every American should be asking: will your governor have the courage to say no when federal power crosses the line? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay informed about these critical constitutional battles. Drop a comment below. Do you think more governors should follow Vermont's example? Your voice matters in this democracy.